Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for this really important topic and this important panel, and for doing so early in the morning on the last day of a conference. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm Nora Greenstein-Jacober. I work at Schusterman Family Philanthropies, and I'm really honored to be able to facilitate this conversation with our esteemed panel. So today we're going to explore how anti-Semitism is affecting teens, and we're going to spotlight some models of Jewish youth empowerment that promote well-being. And we're joined by leading organizations who work to engage, support, and uplift young people in the Jewish community. You'll hear from Be Well, which is JFNA's mental health and well-being initiative, who will preview their new findings for a national study that they conducted on Jewish youth well-being. And they're going to shed some light onto how anti-Semitism is impacting their stress levels. And you're also going to hear from our panelists who are representing Be the Narrative, Mosaic United, Tribe Talk, and BBYO, who each hold deep expertise on how Jewish teens are contending with the current climate of skyrocketing anti-Semitism post-October 7th, as well as insight into what their evolving relationship with Israel looks like. You'll also hear how their work is helping families and their students prepare for post-secondary opportunities and the tools and resources needed to best support teens amidst this dynamic and evolving moment. So at Schusterman Family Philanthropies, we strive for a future in which the United States and Israel live up to their highest ideals and achieve more just and inclusive societies. And within our U.S. Jewish portfolio, that seeks to strengthen Jewish life by empowering people to connect with inclusive Jewish values, deepen their understanding of Israel, and contribute to a better world. We believe that a strong Jewish identity formed during somebody's teen and young adult years empowers them to live a vibrant and meaningful life and build a more equitable and just world. And we believe that Jewish communities really flourish when they are inclusive, accessible, and relevant to all, and our work is grounded in helping our partners bring that vision to life. And we know that mental health and wellness are key elements to creating and maintaining these flourishing communities. And we're really grateful to have incredible partners in this work, including JFNA's Be Well, who we are supporting alongside the partnership of Jim Joseph Foundation and Crown Family Philanthropies. And they're working to support the Jewish community with resources and research to help us all better understand mental health and wellness needs, and to hone the skills that we can build to support our teens, our college students, our young adults, and ourselves. And we hope that you'll come away from this session with ideas and inspiration for how we can support our young people in our communities in a time where they really need it the most. So now I'd love to invite Kate Green, who's the director of the Resiliency Roundtable at Be Well, to share a bit about their national research.
Dip this down. Thank you, Nora. Thank you all so much for being here today. It is really meaningful to see this room filled with faces and knowing that you're committed to young people and their positive development. I'm Kate Green. I work at JFNA on the Be Well initiative. It's the Youth Mental Health and Wellness Initiative. And we work closely in partnership with the network of Jewish Human Service Agencies to really support Federation communities to address the youth mental health needs and to proactively promote well-being for young people 12 to 26. I want to start sharing a little bit about the research that we undertook with a quote from a teen who completed the survey. They said, "Anti-Semitic social media posts are constant. It's honestly the only constant thing in my life, to see me being hated on the internet just for being Jewish. When I try to post about the hostages, something I don't even believe is political and is just a social right issue, I'm harassed and bullied digitally." This quote from a 12th grader is one of many quotes from the first ever national study on teen well-being in the Jewish community. We know that teens are struggling and that they've been struggling long before the youth mental health crisis caught the attention of news headlines during the pandemic. Be Well launched in 2021 to support Jewish teens and young adults. And until now, there was a gap in research on the well-being of Jewish American teens. A total of 2,500 teens in 7th through 12th grade from all across the country completed our anonymous survey in spring 2024. Through this first-of-its-kind national study, Be Well sought to identify their top stressors and sources of support. And from it, we learned an enormous amount about the Jewish teen experience today. One of the top findings was that Jewish teens face a dual burden. They experience the stresses that are common to just being a teenager. We all know being a teenager is hard, but that universal stress is compounded by the experience of being Jewish today. Our groundbreaking study paints a picture of what this Jewish identity-related stress looks like for American teens, which includes concerns about personal safety, misinformation on social media, conflict with peers, feelings of isolation, anxiety about upcoming college decisions, and climate on campuses. 1,400 teens chose to tell us more about their experience in an optional write-in question. In the words of one 11th grader, they shared, "Walking past students in school who I have seen chant Hamas slogans causes me stress. Trying to explain my feelings about the topic to my non-Jewish friends causes me stress. Trying to understand my feelings about the topic causes me stress. Knowing that it is safer for me to remove my Star of David necklace in public and being cautious of who I share my identity with causes me stress." We know from social science research of other minority adolescent populations that there's an interplay between identity, stress, and resilience. Resilience is what we are building, and the Jewish community is positioned to help. We are grateful for the leadership of our professional colleagues who you'll hear from shortly as they shine a light on bright spots we can all learn from. The full findings from Be Well's national research will be released in a forthcoming report and public webinar on Wednesday, November 20th, next week. We'll be sharing tools for facilitated conversations to make sense of the data and for community leaders to action plan. I'll stick around after today's panel, and I'm happy to hear your immediate thoughts and impressions and questions and share how you can join us for that panel or that webinar. Now we will dive deeper into the current realities among teens and how programs on the ground are best supporting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for incredibly important and incredibly sobering information that we heard. And now we're going to turn to our panel to help us kind of make sense of it and learn some best practices from them. So I'm going to ask every panelist to introduce themselves and their organization as they answer their first question. And the first question is going to go to Rabbi Andrew Turkle from Be the Narrative. So Andrew, how has the rise in anti-Semitism post-October 7th and the ongoing Israel and Hamas war impacted teens from your experience, and what have you seen their experience to be like?
Sure, yeah. I'm Rabbi Andrew Turkle. Our organization's called Be the Narrative. We run a program called Student to Student. It started in St. Louis in the early 90s in response to anti-Semitic, I see some St. Louis folks out there, right on, go Cards, next season maybe. It started in response to some anti-Semitic incidents in high schools in St. Louis. And at first the JCRC brought some rabbis around to schools to talk to kids about who Jews are and what Jews are. Yeah, I can tell by your reaction that you understand how that probably went, talking to teens. And they said, well, we have Jewish teens, maybe we should bring Jewish teens around. And that really clicked. So now we're in 26 cities around the country training Jewish teens to be ambassadors, to be sort of a vehicle to share Jews and Judaism through a very personal and human way, right? Which is why we called our organization Be the Narrative. Like, you are the Jewish narrative, right? You are the author of the Jewish story. You're sharing not what all Jews are, but what you do. Right, and our teams are made up of teens from all different denominations. Right, so Reform, Conservative, Orthodox teens get together to craft this presentation and go around to schools and share it. And I like to say that we're the antidote to the statement, well, all Jews are, fill in the blank with your favorite anti-Semitic term, right? Because if you've met one of our presentation teams, you've met 3 or 4 very different Jewish kids with very different experiences of being Jewish, but who all regard each other as peers and colleagues. And it's a really powerful thing to share with a community that, as I am always reminded when I go visit these presentations, really knows very little about who we are and what we are beyond what they see on maybe headlines or social media, right? So our work has shifted some since October 7th, as many of us can relate. In conversations in the early days, like, well, anti-Semitism, it's not that bad out there, right? We're really, maybe we're more a youth organization, and let's drill down on that. Anti-Semitism is kind of a downer, right? And then seeing the rise in October 7th in anti-Semitism post October 7th really just shook so many of our understanding of what we do and how we fit into the world, right? So thinking about resources to support our teens, how do we train them to go out into this world? How do we talk to their parents, their rabbis, their educators, right? Because now there is real concern, like how do I send my kid out to be publicly Jewish, publicly identifiably Jewish in high schools today? On the positive side, I will say that I feel very confident in being able to look into these parents' eyes and say that the number of incidents that we have had has been extremely minimal, less than a handful out of thousands the last couple years, right? So that to me is encouraging, but there's a tremendous amount of work to do that I'm sure we'll talk more about as we go through the session.
Thank you. Yeah. I'd like to now pass it to Alana Eden from Mosaic United. And Alana, I know that Mosaic recently did some research, so I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that and what you've learned about teens' evolving relationship with Israel. And how is it different of what they're like navigating online and in social media than what they're doing in person with their peers?
Sure. So I'll just also introduce myself a little bit about Mosaic United. We fly under the radar, but we're actually a joint venture between the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, the State of Israel, and Jewish Philanthropy Worldwide. And we invest in different projects, strategically invest in different projects to strengthen Jewish identity and connection to Israel. In the teen division, we specifically focus on 13 to 19-year-olds, and I think we're unique in that we want to assess the global landscape, so we're not just focused specifically on American Jewry. To that end, we really wanted to understand the teen experience in light of October 7th. There had been a lot of emphasis on college campus, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, and we really felt that there's something happening amongst high schoolers as well, and people aren't necessarily aware of it. I think the difference between our research is that our focus wasn't necessarily on mental health and resilience, and we're so glad that focus is there. Ours was really more on attitudes towards Israel, views on the war, and general experience with anti-Semitism and Jewish identity. So what was unique, again, is our survey was worldwide. So 80% of teens were from America, but we had teens also from Europe, from Australia, from England, South Africa, generally English-speaking countries. And I think what was really unique is 40% of our respondents had no Jewish activity background, by which I mean these were teens who had not gone to Jewish summer camps, they're not part of Jewish youth groups, and they hadn't learned in Jewish day schools. They maybe had marked a bar bat mitzvah, but they're what we call the highly unaffiliated. And I think what I want to just mention is resetting the narrative a little bit. 94% of them reported that they had an emotional attachment to Israel. Okay, including teens who really had no formal Jewish experience. Now, some of that was slight attachment to moderate to extreme, but this narrative that's out there right now that Jewish teens are totally disconnected from Israel, don't support Israel, it's just not true. And the data really reflects that. We found that they were generally supportive of Israel. In fact, the majority was more supportive of Israel in the wake of October 7th. The results were both reaffirming and worrying. There was misinformation and propaganda. We definitely saw the effect of that. But I think in general, it's important to emphasize the fact that Jewish teens are still engaged in Israel and connected and want to connect. We saw some interesting things in light of the anti-Semitism that they're experiencing. So we saw that Jewish teens were far more tapped into their Jewish identity post-October 7th, far more interested in learning more about Judaism and their Jewish identity. 40% of them had conversations that they never had before with their families, and they wanted to talk to their families, and they also wanted to be with other Jews, which is great for us as Jewish professionals. At the same time, there was a cost to that. They were more scared. So about a third of them reported hiding their Jewish identity, hiding Jewish symbols, and also being hesitant to attend any Jewish or Israel-related events. So it kind of goes hand in hand. I think to answer the last part of your question in terms of the social media space versus the in real life space, we were actually surprised because we had assumed that given the large amount of time teens at this point spend online, most of the anti-Semitism they experienced was online. And that wasn't the case. So first of all, about half of them, 47% reported personally experienced anti-Semitism, and some of it was quite harsh. We're talking physical threats, violent threats, graffiti, vandalism. It wasn't just offhand comments. Of that, most of it, like 97% reported online, but over 90% reported happening in peer-to-peer interactions as well. And in school, a lot of them reported it coming in school, and surprisingly, in equal amounts from administrators, teachers, and the curriculum as from their peers. I think that for us was really surprising, and the stark difference between the States and the rest of the world was really surprising. In that regard, the States has a systemic issue, and we're not really addressing it. I think all in all, though, we still saw that teens are resilient, they're opting in, and they want to learn more, and for us, that's just an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, to understand like where these teens are coming from and how they're finding space with each other and feeling shored up by their Jewish identity is certainly a bright spot in that tough research that you did. I'd like to turn it to Dan Mezzostrano, who is, I'm going to get this hopefully right, it's a lot of words that I don't say often, the Grand Aleph Gadol at BBYO, and you're the 100th one, which is really an incredible milestone and accomplishment for the movement, representing like the teen community right now. And I'd love for you to reflect on, one, what your role has been like this year so far, and what you've seen of how the stress of anti-Semitism is affecting teens, that you've traveled the country, you're traveling the globe, like what are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Mezzostrano. I'm currently serving as the 100th Grand Aleph Gadol, or one of BBYO's 2 teen international presidents. And so in my role this year, I'm serving as the top teen elected official of BBYO. We are a fully teen-led organization. All of the recruitment, all of the fundraising, all of the programming is done by the teens for the teens. And so being in this role is a huge, huge honor to be able to lead all of my peers as they continue to build their communities, many of which you are in, and continue to build a great BBYO chapters. And so as part of my role, I spend the year traveling, going into different communities across North America and as well as across the world, and meeting with these teens on the ground. A lot of it is talking about BBYO and how we can continue to build their chapters, but as there is so much anti-Semitism in the world, it's very hard for this not to come up in conversation, and it often is a topic of what has experience in schools been, what has experience with anti-Semitism online been. And so it's really an unavoidable subject for a lot of teens, and something that a lot of teens are ready to bring up and start to talk about and address. And so BBYO did a survey on anti-Semitism and teens' experiences since October 7th, and we found that 75% of teens have faced anti-Semitism. Whether this is online, whether it's in person, whatever the medium of facing this anti-Semitism, they faced it. And often, if you go into a room of Jewish teens, there are those outspoken ones that are really going to stand up and talk about their experience and what exactly has happened. But I was at a JNF conference last year in the high school summit, and when a speaker asked at the front of the room who has faced anti-Semitism in the last month and a half since October 7th, no one raised their hands. And that's shocking, considering all of the survey results, like whether it's from our survey or from many of the other surveys we're talking about today. We've seen so many teens facing anti-Semitism on so many different levels, and there are a lot of teens who aren't wanting to talk about it, even at the highest levels of leadership, and even at all of these places you would really expect teens to be talking about it. And so while there are those teens that want to talk about it, a lot of teens are just looking for a safe space and looking to be with community during this time. And that's, I think, the most important thing that we've been able to find over this year, and the most important thing that we can do to continue to support these teens.
Thank you, Dan. And I'd like to round out our first set of introductions with Robin Friedman from Tribe Talk. And I think what you can share a bit about your organization, but it really, I think, is fueled kind of well by what Dan was saying, like what are the systems in place and what are teens thinking about and talking about, and what are their decisions that are coming up for them, and how are they taking in information to kind of make those decisions. And I know you do a lot of work around preparing folks for that. And I'd love to hear how these experiences that we're hearing teens are having, how are they impacting their decisions, Reed, the peer groups that they're in, the participation that you're seeing in Jewish programs, and the decisions that they're making around like college and other big life choices.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Friedman, and I'm one of the co-founders of Tribe Talk. We were founded 5 years ago when 3 women in Boston saw the rising anti-Semitism on the college campus. And at that time, everybody looked at us and said, anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, they now don't say, anti-Semitism. And what we do is we help everyone from middle schoolers through college, but primarily middle schoolers and high schoolers, prepare for Jewish life on campus. So we want to make sure that they have a meaningful Jewish life on campus, and part of that is understanding anti-Semitism and knowing how to navigate it if they're confronted with it. And not every student is going to go to college and be confronted with anti-Semitism, but I will say that Kate's research, Be Well's research, is definitely in line with what we're seeing, which is teens are very nervous and stressed about college. They're stressed about the college process, and more than other teens are stressed about the college process, they're stressed about the Jewish piece of the college process. Now, pre-10-7, a 16-year-old starting to make their college list was looking at what geography do I want, right? Do I want a cold climate, or maybe I want to go to a school where I can just wear shorts? I mean, they're 16 years old. Do I want a school with Greek life? Do I want a school with certain majors, if we're lucky that they're actually thinking about that? Now, students are looking at, okay, what else do I need to know about schools? So we help them in 2 ways. First of all, on our website, tribetalk.org, we have a college comparison database where we try to collect information about 150 schools that many Jewish students attend, that provides a lot of information, more than, for example, in the Hillel Guide. We do have the Hillel grade for every school, but in addition to that, we have the 10-7 letters that we could get our hands on that were initially written by the schools, and they're fascinating. So if you're looking at 3 schools and you can see the letters that the administration put out right after 10-7, you will get a sense of where they were, at least at that point in time. We list all the anti-Israel organizations as well as the pro-Israel organizations. So if you want to know if a school has SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, that's a good place to look. So we're giving students, first of all, a database of information so that they can at least start out by seeing what's on what. Then in addition to that, we work with students to understand you need to think about what you want from Jewish life on campus. This is going to be the first time that your parents aren't telling you what to do in that regard. So, or they might be telling you, but they have no control. So what you need to do is start thinking about, even if you're thinking, I don't want the Jewish in college. I'm done with the Jewish. I went to Jewish day school, K through 12. I want something different, which some students say to us. We say back, think about if you want the option. How many times in your life have you changed your mind on something? Maybe you think about what kind of meaningful Jewish life do you want? Do you want Greek life? Do you want Jewish Greek life, Jewish fraternities and sororities? Are you into food insecurity? Do you want a challah for hunger? Are you studying business? Do you want a school with a strong Tamid chapter? There's so much Jewish life. Do you want the option of being able to go to Shabbat dinner? Do you want to go to Hillel? Do you want to go to Chabad? And by the way, half of high school students have no idea. They've heard the term Hillel and Chabad, but they actually don't know what they are. So we have to start by explaining what they are. A few years ago, I was working with a group of 20 high schoolers, and I started talking about Hillel. And finally, some brave high school student stood up and said, "What's Hillel?" And I said, "How many people here don't know what Hillel actually is?" And every one of them raised their hands. So we try to give them information so that they understand and so that they can make informed choices. One other thing about the college process, it used to be that you could get your acceptances and then go visit the schools that you really thought you wanted to visit. Now it's more important than ever to visit these schools. And when we visit the schools, we tell them, call your Hillel, call the Chabad, call whatever the Jewish organization is on campus. Even if you're going for a school tour, get a tour from somebody who is Jewish from one of these organizations. They never turn you down. They will always find a student. It can be in the middle of finals. They will find somebody willing to work with you or talk to you or have coffee with you. Read the student newspapers. You will get a really good sense of what's going on by campus by just reading the student newspapers, and a lot of them are available online. Look at the posters that are posted. Are there hostage posters that have been ripped down and not replaced? In one school, there were hostage posters. They looked like hostage posters, but they were actually Palestinian. The claim was that these were Palestinian babies that the Israelis had murdered. Okay? Look at what's going on in the schools. I think it's more important than ever. We encourage students, to the extent that they can, to look at the schools and really pay attention to the Jewish piece. And that was not something that students had to do as much pre-10-7.
Thank you, Robin. And I think what all of you touched on a little bit is there's so many more considerations of what it means to just be a teen and a Jewish teen, and both like in this current moment and the things they have to think about down the road. I mean, I certainly was not considering all of that when I was applying to college. I was thinking about the cold. So I'd love to pivot to talking, we've talked a lot about what is impacting teens right now, and I'd love to just shift to what can be done to support them and to really say it plainly. Dan, I'd love to first send this question to you. What do teens need from adults in their life right now?
Yeah, again, it's about creating these safe spaces. You're gonna have the teens that are at this really high level that are looking to go out and combat anti-Semitism, and they're looking to have these tough conversations and be really educated about all things Israel, all things anti-Semitism, whatever is going on in this crazy world that they may come across and they may want to combat. What we really need is to look for the teens who aren't necessarily willing to do that. And these are the teens that are going to go to college and may not be as interested in getting involved with Jewish life. And they're going to go through life and not have as strong of a connection to this community, when we want to bring in as many people as we can. And we need to engage teens while they're at this stage so we can set them up to have a very fruitful and robust Jewish life. And so it's really about creating these safe spaces that Jewish teens don't get a lot of now these days. Even if they're in school, even if they're within their sports teams and within trusted environments, there's always a little piece of tension, is what I hear from teens. And there's always that one thought where you say one wrong thing about Israel that someone doesn't like, or you say one thing about you being Jewish and the wrong person hears. It can blow up into this huge thing that a lot of Jewish teens just don't really want to care about, and really don't want to embarrass them or feel like it puts them at any social disadvantage. So creating these safe spaces like BBYO chapters, like whatever other youth group presence you have in your communities, is really important to give these Jewish teens that weekly or bi-weekly taste of what can Jewish life look like, and what can it mean to be able to wear my Magen David out and not have to worry about what someone else is going to say. So creating these safe spaces and really reaching as many Jewish teens as possible, even if it's just bringing them a not through Jewish activity. You know, in BBYO there are a lot of sports programs. We do a lot of community service programs, things that aren't necessarily inherently Jewish, that may tie in and incorporate some of our Jewish values, but are really just giving a space and a time where Jewish teens can be around other Jewish teens who they know have gone through that experience, not necessarily so they can talk about the experience, but so that they can know that they're around people that understand and around people that aren't going to judge them.
Thank you. Robin, I'm wondering from your perspective too, you work with so many teens and their family systems. How have you been seeing what teens are asking for their families and what their families are able to give them in these really critical moments?
So I just want to follow up on something that Dan said, which is, I agree, not every teen wants to go and be an Israel advocate, and not every teen thinks that they want the Jewish. Very true. And also, just to clarify, not every teen is going to experience anti-Semitism in college. And one other thing about college, some of the schools that have the most challenging anti-Semitism problems also have amazing Jewish life. But what we can do to help them as adults to prepare is to teach them. A lot of education is needed. From middle school on up, I can't say this enough, we are not giving our middle schoolers enough credit. Many middle schoolers need to understand what anti-Semitism is. It's not a course like a 10-week diatribe on anti-Semitism, but they need the basics. They need to know what anti-Semitism is. They need to understand a little bit about Israel. They need to understand that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. We need to give them basic information to counteract what they're seeing online. We need to talk about swastikas, because that seems to be the new F word for every middle schooler. We need to talk about money and some common tropes with them. It's shocking to me how many times we get in a room, we start talking about anti-Semitic things, and somebody will say, when I was in middle school, either somebody threw pennies at me or I saw pennies thrown at somebody, and I had no idea that that was an anti-Semitic stereotype and where that came from. And had I known, I would have told somebody. But they didn't know. We need to give them some basics about stereotypes, about Israel, and just so they have at least enough information to know where to go, and also to know where to go if they have a problem. It's actually surprising when you get a group of middle schoolers in a room and you tell them this is a safe space, ask whatever you want, a different kind of safe space, and all of a sudden all these questions come out. So it's shocking how much actually that they've been already exposed to. And also we have to talk to them about social media. Ask a group of middle schoolers how many of them have posted something online that has nothing to do with Israel. It might not even have to do with Judaism. It might be I scored my first goal in ice hockey today or in soccer, and get back a hashtag Free Palestine. At least half of them will raise their hand. Then if you ask them how many have actually gotten something different, like have seen it, have seen somebody else post it who's Jewish, they will almost all of them raise their hands. This is something we need to start talking to them about. How to handle it, how to respond, what to do when it happens, and why it's not okay. For high schoolers, we really need to give them the 101. So what we do is we have about a 90-minute seminar that we do with them. It's about 25 minutes of real frontal so that we have a shared language. And the first thing we talk about is, don't laugh, what is anti-Semitism? Ask a group of college students how many people have heard that anti-Semitism is hatred of Semitic peoples. And therefore, you can support Hamas and not be anti-Semitic because Hamas are Semitic peoples. Okay? Half of them at least will raise their hands. They don't know that it was a term coined by an anti-Semite in 1879 by Wilhelm Marr saying, you know, that this was because Judenhass or Jew hatred was too crass and therefore we need a better term for it. They don't know anything about it. These are things that they need to know. They need to know the basic stereotypes. They need to know that when Jamie Foxx posts, who by the way has more followers than there are Jews in the world, posts on Instagram, they killed this new dude named Jesus. What do you think they'll do to you? Fake friends, fake love. That where that's coming from, that it's deicide. Where did that come from? They need the basic tropes and how they manifest today. Then they need some basic information about Israel, and they need to talk about social media and how to respond, because that's their life. And in addition to that, you can talk about how can we help the Palestinians, and they also need to know, by the way, when Israel rhetoric crosses the line, criticism of Israel crosses the line into anti-Semitism, and when it doesn't. Sometimes I do a thing with the high schoolers and I say, look, if you don't like the current right-wing government of Israel, you're not an anti-Semite. If you don't like Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, you're not an anti-Semite. If you want a two-state solution, you're not an anti-Semite. And I have a whole list. And you can see the relief come over their faces because they're afraid to say anything that's going to be offensive to anybody. And you can say to them, you can love Israel and still be a thinking citizen of the world and critical and talk about these things. That's okay. And they need to know that too.
Thank you. I really appreciate that because listen, we see this with teens, and I will say we probably see this with adults in our life too, that we're just in this moment where it's really hard to know what you can ask, and if we can't model that for our young people, then how are we going to be able to proceed as a society? We talked a lot about what the individual adults can do, but Alana and Andrew, I'd love to see from your vantage points, what are the best practices we could be bringing to Jewish teen programs and educational settings to provide this support in the spaces that we facilitate formally? And Alana, I'll send it to you first.
Sure. So I think there are some clear areas first for adult intervention that, again, just coming off of the study. So about half of Jewish teens reported that they feel they have the resources needed to address anti-Semitism when they're experiencing it, which is great. But that also means half of them do not. And every Jewish teen in this day and age should know exactly where to turn to and what to do when they experience anti-Semitism. So I think that's on us. One of the most surprising takeaways was we asked them, when you report anti-Semitism, were your concerns questioned, minimized, or dismissed? 78% of them reported yes. Okay, so again, that's a systemic issue that we as the adults in the room need to deal with. I think in general, we need to continue doing what we're doing, which is providing more Jewish activities and creating stronger, more resilient Jews. We saw very strong correlation between teens who participate in Jewish activities and who had stronger Jewish identity, stronger Jewish pride, stronger connection to Israel, and so on. I think that one of the areas that maybe is a new frontier that we can be adding to our programming, and I understand that this is not necessarily feasible for every program, but by far the greatest effect that we saw was on teens who met other Israeli teens, right? So we really examined this concept of mifkashim, anyone who had a meaningful encounter with Israeli teens, and the data was staggering. Once you have that interpersonal connection, you not only had a stronger connection to Israel, that we understood, but they were far more immune to propaganda, which again is not surprising. Once you have an interpersonal connection, it's very hard to demonize an entity, but they also were just stronger, prouder Jews. So I think anyway, making sure that we can insert those interpersonal connections in our programming is a great win. I always say you take a 30-second TikTok and pit it against a living, breathing human being, and that living, breathing human being will win every single time. And that's maybe a new frontier for us in the American Jewish community to explore, but ways to make sure that those connections and relationships are being built. And I'll just add that I want to make the distinction between supporting and protecting our teens. Like, our teens don't necessarily need our protection. We need to empower and equip them, which is what everyone on this panel here is doing. And I think that it behooves us to take some of this education and best practices and bring it back to our programming.
Sure. I think the cumulative effect of all the things that this wonderful panel has surfaced, right? Constant anti-Semitism on social media, anti-Semitism from friends and peers in their high school classrooms, teammates, right? Anti-Semitism from causes and organizations that they may have been previously very active in, right? All of a sudden, like the climate justice organization feels like they need to put out a statement on the conflict, right? Like, okay, and make Zionism a qualification to keep you out of the climate justice movement. Like, how does that make sense? So teens are feeling alone. Jewish teens are often feeling very alone, very isolated in these non-Jewish environments, right? And you've heard some of this talk about the surge and some data about isn't there. Maybe this is part of what's driving people to find more sense of Jewish community because we're feeling so alone in so many other parts of our lives, right? It's a very worrisome place to be. So giving teens a place to feel comfortably, safely Jewish is vital. Another thing we're seeing to be able to do this work, and the piece on education is huge, right? You can't have strong, confident young Jews without having some education, right? And in a world where many of our non-Orthodox kids are stopping their Jewish education after bar mitzvah, right? We all know about the bar mitzvah drop-off in Hebrew schools and supplementary schools, right? So we're sending kids out into a very complex environment of anti-Semitism with really a pediatric understanding of their Judaism. That's not going to work. And so we spend a lot of time crafting education sessions, training about basics of Jewish theology, history, identity, connection to Zionism. Right? We're not trying to put talking points into kids' mouths. We're trying to give them a strong base from which they can develop their sense of Jewish identity as young adults that will serve them long into their lives. Right? We can't go out singing the Jonah and the Whale song and be confident Jewish adults. Right? We need a more complex understanding. I started as a camp song leader. That's really all I ever wanted to do, and fell into the rest of this stuff. But we owe it to our teens to give them a more nuanced, more complicated understanding of their Jewish identity to be able to go out and talk about it. The anti-Semitism they're seeing, especially from adults, is really worrisome. So all the more important that the Jewish adults in their lives show up, listen, help them, and take them seriously. If the choice is between hiding your Jewish star, tucking your Jewish star in and not talking about it, or being socially ostracized, which for teens is like the paramount concern, right? No one wants to be socially ostracized. That's a terrible place to be. So making those, there was a great op-ed a while ago, from safe spaces to brave spaces. Right, like, yes, we do need to protect our kids, we do need to give them skills, but we also need to give them the grit, the resiliency, the confidence to go out into a world and speak the truth that we know and counter the narratives out there that are false and dangerous and damaging.
Thank you. And I think, to what everyone is saying, it's not just a space that we can feel interiorly, comfortable, safe, proud to be with each other, but to be able to go out there and speak to our identity, or feel that we can own it, or know where the decisions need to be made, or who the right people are, and have those resources available. And I think that really shifts us well to talking about, we're talking about how we can support these teens, but also how can we empower teens, that there's a lot that the systems around them can do, but also, you said, teens are resilient, teens are strong, and teens are individuals themselves with their own decisions. So I would love to talk about what we can do to help teens lead and respond and support their peers themselves, because we know peer-to-peer engagement is so important. So I'm wondering how we can encourage teens to respond in these moments where they're seeing instances of hate, or when they're seeing anti-Israel sentiments online, in person, and what we can do to give those kinds of tools to them. Robin, I'd love to start with you on that.
So when we facilitate anti-Semitism workshops, that's a huge part of what we do. So what we do is we have collected, unfortunately, there's no shortage of these, of actual stories that have happened to teens in schools, and we break them up into groups, and we hand out a little scenario for each of them, and we have them decide, is it anti-Semitism, and if it is, what would they do? So just to give you a sense, let's see, we have the 10th grade class studying night. Does anybody know, from San Francisco, where one of the English teachers was prefacing the book with a Holocaust denial book called The Hidden Tyranny, to tell them the truth before they had to read Night. It went on for years before some brave student finally told their English teacher, and it took 10 months to get that fixed. So they get the scenario, and they have to decide what to do. Should they go tell another teacher? Should they tell their parents? Should they go to the school? What can they do? Should they talk to their peers? We also talk about, just a basic one. You're walking down the hall with your friends, and somebody says, hey, there's a penny on the ground. You're Jewish. Aren't you going to pick it up? Right there. How about the debate team in Bethesda, Maryland, where somebody said, where the two captains said, we're going to lure our Jewish friends to an island with challah and then burn them, okay? What happened there? How about the situation in New Jersey, in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, where there were two tables during a school fair, club fair, and one table had, for the Jewish students, had Israeli flag and had it had an Israeli flag and yellow ribbons for the hostages, and the table next to them was for the Muslim student group, and they had keffiyeh on their table, and the assistant principal came in and said the Israeli flags and the yellow ribbons had to go, but the keffiyeh could stay. So they work on this, and then at the end, hopefully if we've done our job, they've come up with all these things that you can do, and then we go over it. Things to do if you encounter anti-Semitism, because we are trying to empower them. So things like, first of all, tell your parents. If you're physically threatened, call the police or find security. Don't record if it's not safe. Don't walk into an anti-Israel protest with your phone in somebody's face. Record, you laugh, but we have to tell them this. Record from a safe distance. So we go over, write an op-ed for your student newspaper, all of the things, organize an event with like-minded students. If we're doing the right thing, by the end, they have created for their own minds a list of what they can do if they're confronted for anti-Semitism. I just want to follow up on something Alana said about working with Israelis and peer-to-peer. I have a quick story. We were last summer in Green Camp in Texas. Anybody know that? Okay. Yeah. So we facilitated some anti-Semitism workshops there for their middle schoolers, high school, and college students that were on campus. And there was an Israeli soldier somebody who just came out of the IDF. And we had about 100 middle schoolers in a room, and they were in a room about this size, and they were spread all over the floor, laying down. And we were doing facilitating an anti-Semitism workshop, and one student raised their hand and said, my friend said, isn't it true, my friends told me that the IDF just goes in and kills all the Palestinians, even the Palestinian children. Now, I hadn't got to the part of the program yet where we talked about all the moral ways that the IDF does to prevent that. But he said, I looked at him and he said, can I take this one? I said, absolutely. And he got up, and you saw 100 teens, first of all, sit up, okay? You could not hear a pin drop in that room. And he talked about all the things that they do to prevent the loss of life. And I am telling you, that changed the opinion of 100 teens in that room. So it really does, it does make a difference. But these kids, they need to be empowered because they're going into a world that we didn't go into, and they have to know how to handle it.
Thank you. Anyone else on ways that you've been able to encourage teens to respond, or things that you've heard best practices or things that have worked?
Can I say something on that? Yeah, the history of anti-Semitism, history of some of these tropes, where they come from, being able to unpack that helps debunk them a lot. But also understanding where our neighbors are coming from, right? We're doing interfaith outreach, right? We're having Jewish kids talk about Judaism to a mainly non-Jewish audience. And so we have to be able to speak their language a little bit. The term, I was thinking about this morning, the term that is most nails on the chalkboard to me lately is Judeo-Christian, right? Yes, we have many similarities, but it's the differences that we need to appreciate about one another. You have a ritual with bread and wine. We have a ritual with bread and wine. They are not the same. They do not have the same context. Dara Horn wrote a great piece about this. I don't know if you guys have read Dara Horn. If you haven't, I think thinking about, new ways of thinking about anti-Semitism and Holocaust education. He said for many years, the idea behind community relations and Jewish interfaith outreach is, look how similar we are. Please don't murder us. Obviously, that approach has left something to be desired given the recent history, right? So our approach is very much not, look how much we are like you. Right? Our approach is understanding more about our Christian neighbors, our non-Jewish neighbors, in St. Louis, mainly Christian, so that we can better understand ourselves. Right? And when we appreciate those differences about one another, that is where we can really learn. I was in a high school classroom recently, modern Orthodox 11th grade girl talking about her family Shabbat practice. Friday afternoon, they set the timers, the hot plate, they all turn off their phones, they have Shabbat dinner, phones and electronics stay off until Saturday night. And in my mind, I'm expecting this classroom of teenagers, this is a Catholic girls' school, expecting a classroom of teenagers to say, oh my gosh, I could never be without my phone for 25 hours. That's unthinkable. What the actual response was, one of the students raised her hand and said, that sounds really nice. I would like to do that. And our modern Orthodox presenter was like, you can. Your phone has an off button. Anybody can do this. Like, Shabbat is not just for us. Right? Now, I don't think that girl's going to go out and convert modern Orthodox and start being Shomer Shabbos. But maybe she's going to go home to her family and say, hey, wouldn't it be nice if one night a week we all put our phones away and had dinner? And I learned that from the student-to-student presentation by these Jewish kids in my classroom. That's how we're going to start bridging these gaps. We have got to understand what we share, which is a lot, but also appreciate our differences, because without that, we're missing what makes having a diverse society wonderful and beautiful.
That's great. I love that. It's not making ourselves less to bond with people, but really highlighting what we have to give to and owning that. I think that's great. And we can all, everyone at any age can empower themselves to do that. Dan, I'd love to hear from what you've seen of what is the role of teen-led and peer-to-peer programming in helping to create these brave spaces for dialogue and just supporting each other. And again, what have you seen as you've been engaging with these teen leaders across the country?
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think that this teen age, the kind of 13 to 19 span, the post-bar mitzvah, pre-college age group of Jewish teens is the most important time we need to bring them in. This is the time where they don't necessarily have those deeply institutionalized Jewish outlets where they're able to practice Judaism, learn about Judaism, develop their connection to Israel. It's this post-bar mitzvah training pre-college where there's Hillel and Chabad and API and all of these other really great organizations that Jewish youth can get involved with. And so this is the time we really need to bring them in. And in BBYO, we have this model where we have our summer leadership programs, and every teen who goes on one of these programs, they're asked at the end, replace yourself. Give us the name of 3 teens, and who are these teens that are going to take your place on this leadership program next year? It's about Lador Vador and finding the next generation who's going to take over this mantle and take our positions. And in the same way we do that on the summer leadership program, this room and the JFNA General Assembly in 20, 30 years is going to be filled by those Jewish teens. And they're the ones who are going to take this Jewish leadership mantle and continue to build the environment and build the next future of Jewish teens and the next generation and the next generation. It's important that at this age, we're starting to give them those tools. And in BBYO, that's why we are all team-led. We're giving them these opportunities where they can plan programming, whether it's Jewish focused or not. They can get a glimpse into what fundraising is and what the Jewish nonprofit space looks like. We can get them into recruitment and what community development and expansion looks like, and giving them all of this real world experience and showing them that this is what the future could look like. This is what your career could look like. This is what you can do both as a teen and as an adult to continue building this community. And in a time right now where there's a lot of demoralization of Jewish life, and there are a lot of teens who are beginning to be turned away, really showing them this bright future and showing them everything that a career in Jewish life could be, or really just participating in Jewish life can be, is really, really important, and bringing those teens in and making sure they're around to take our places.
I love that. And I think probably for a room of Jewish professionals and stakeholders, it's really inspiring to hear that teens are thinking about who I can be in these rooms in a couple decades. It's nice to know that you all are thinking about what your legacy is already. Alana, I'd love to hear from the research that you shared a little bit about what it tells us about how we can empower our teen leaders. What have you learned about that?
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything that stands out. I've already said, I think the most salient points, which is to continue with the education and empowerment. I will add again that we saw really stark differences between teens who have participated and engaged in Jewish activities versus those who don't. So just continuing with that, and then continuing to support the work that everyone here is doing.
If I can ask a follow-up actually about those it's so hard to know the right words to use because you don't want to make anyone feel outside of a big tent, but those who are less engaged in these traditional forms of Jewish life, are there things that they said or you heard that made it seem like there are spaces that they want to be pulled into, or the ways to do it in a way that feels organic and isn't pushing too hard? Because I don't know much, I do not have a teen myself, but I do remember being a teen, and I know the farther someone pushed me towards something, the more I wanted to push against it.
Yeah, so we didn't have qualitative answers from them, so we don't have specific understanding of what it is that draws them in. I will say that we still saw very high interest. For example, in the statistic I mentioned earlier about connection to Israel, it was still quite high amongst teens who didn't participate in Jewish activities, who didn't really come from that strong Jewish backgrounds. We asked them if they wanted to visit Israel, and about half of them said yes. So again, these are teens who really aren't engaged in traditional Jewish life or institutional Jewish life, but they understand that there's something there that they want to be a part of. I think what was really interesting is that there were some metrics specifically with anti-Semitism that just affected them in equal measures to everyone else. So for example, that question where I asked do you feel like your concerns about anti-Semitism were minimized or dismissed? It was consistent across the board, regardless of Jewish backgrounds, of age, or geographic location. And in many other areas, we saw very stark differences between, I think that in this particular group, maybe the most worrying trends was when it came to views on the war, which is where we kind of integrated the propaganda and misinformation. So we asked them questions about sympathy for Hamas, about sympathy for the Palestinian people, making quite a differentiation. If they believe that Israel is committing genocide, if they believe that the war is justified. And we saw the highest rates between the highest disparities between teens who were heavily engaged in Jewish life and those who didn't. I'll just throw out a statistics because I think it's a wake-up call for us. We asked teens if they had sympathy for Hamas. And of those who didn't have any Jewish engagement or activity, again, no summer camps, no Jewish schools, no day schools, no Hebrew schools, over 60% agreed with that statement, that they sympathized with Hamas. Amongst those who were heavily engaged in Jewish life, 6% agreed with the statement. So again, for us, I think it just behooves us to kind of make sure that we're integrating as many teens in as many Jewish activities as we can. They don't even need to be connected to Israel, but making sure that they feel connected and a part of something makes an important difference.
Could I add on to that a little bit? I think we've seen a very similar experience. I'd say about 2/3 of our kids, the Jewish student presenters working in our program, are like kind of you're typically engaged, right? They're on their youth group board, or they're a madrich or madricha in their synagogue, etc. But about 1/3, this is the only Jewish thing they do. And that's significant. That's a really good chunk of kids who this is really the only Jewish thing they do, right? They're not at youth group, they're not at summer camp, they're not at day school. So why this? Because they want to make a difference in anti-Semitism, right? If we told them like, hey, do you want to come learn more about like Jewish history and holidays and life cycle events, they'd be like, maybe not so much. But if we say, hey, do you want to come work with your peers from all different denominations to make a difference in anti-Semitism in our schools and our communities, people will raise their hands for that. So I think having a clear mission and communicating it and knowing that we can empower teens to help make a difference is really edifying and really an enticing proposition, right? More than just do something for yourself, do something for yourself and your community that can really make a difference.
Andrea, I really appreciate that. And what I'm hearing you say too is it's not just come join us, but come build with us. It's giving them that, like, they are participating in your framework, sure, but they are actually the one like building the tools, being the agents of change.
Being the narrative, would you say?
Oh, I'm sure you would say. And that's why he's paid the big bucks. Thank you all so much. Yeah. I would love now to turn it over to you all. You've heard a lot of our panelists speaking, and I'm sure that there are questions or thoughts, and we really want this to be generative and interactive because we know that's the best way to be in this space. So my colleague Kate will help grab people, and there's a microphone here that I think she will be passing around. So Kate, I'll let you work the room.
Thank you. I'm Heather from Montreal. You guys are amazing. Thank you very much for everything that you're doing, that you continue to do. Fantastic. I want to talk about my son, who when he went, in Montrealers, we don't go away to school like people from the States. So my two boys did go to the States. My son went to Michigan. And I kept saying to him, you know, you should go to Hillel, you should go to Chabad. He's like, no, no, no. I go to visit him. I'm trying to get through how much communication there is between my son and myself. I go to visit him, and I see in his room a hockey shirt with an H. And I go, what is that? He goes, that's Hillel. I said, what are you doing with a Hillel hockey shirt? He goes, I play for Hillel. What you're talking about is so important, and you talk about navigating, and you talk about the people, the older people around these kids, like me being a parent. And I don't have the words. I don't have that narrative to teach them. So you are doing a great job teaching your peers. Well, your peers, these young people, your peers. I'm doing a terrible job because I don't know what to say. And if you tell me, if you help me, give me a site to go to that I can do this and I can share it with my friends and maybe I can join a class. For people my age, with non-Jewish, anybody who is interested in anti-Semitism, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, anyone, but maybe Robin, you start us off.
I think you're doing a great job. Your kid is playing hockey in Michigan. I have one playing there too, by the way. You know, the fact that he's engaging at Hillel is great. You obviously have the words because you can't just, it actually requires you to walk up Hill Street and go into the Hillel building, and somebody's engaging with him. It's not like you can just sign up online. He actually walked in there and did that. So you have the right words. I think the important thing is just to let them know that you're there for them, and that if there's a problem, that even if you don't have the words, you'll find the words, okay? We get calls from parents all the time. You can call Tribe Talk anytime. If we don't have their answer for you, we will find the right person for you. We'll find the right organization to help you. But actually, somehow you obviously are doing a great job, because I'm telling you, he had to go actually into the building in order to be able to do that. Okay, and oh, by the way, the hockey jersey has the mem on it. It's very cool. So you're doing fine.
Hi, thank you so much. This was a presentation that had lots and lots of tachlis, lots and lots of like real world information and not theorizing. So we really appreciate that. My question is sort of from the point of view of parents, but I'm also a child psychologist, so bear with me. I completely agree that anything you push your 13 to 19-year-old towards may drive them the other direction. But I think what a lot of parents are looking for is, sometimes it's the words, but sometimes it's, how do I encourage them to go get the words from any of your programs, from any of the empowerment and engagement things that you're trying to do? How would parents, how would teachers, whoever, Hebrew school teachers, confirmation class teachers, encourage the age group that you're talking about to go get what you're offering them? Because I'm not sure it's always the right thing for parents. And Jewish parents can sometimes overdo here and there. And when we do it, it's not nearly as effective than when any of your programs do it. So how do we encourage them to find you rather than attempt to do it as overprotective Jewish parents that we want to be?
Speaking, I guess, as one overprotective Jewish parent to another.
Speak as nothing else.
Although my boys are a little younger, so I've got a little time. I have a first and a fourth grader. Though my wife is a Hillel professional, so I resonate deeply with that work and concern. You know who's really cool to a middle schooler is a high schooler. You know who's really cool to a high schooler is a college kid, not a grown-up like us. So finding those influential kids in your community, right? Like the student-to-student program, when it becomes self-sufficient, it's because teens are recruiting their younger friends, saying, this is a cool program, you should do it. Dan saying that to a teenager is gonna work 1,000 times better than me saying it to a teenager, right? So talking to the people in your community who are connected in the teen landscape, figuring out how to really mobilize, motivate, leverage those teen relationships is huge, because that's the way to make things self-sustaining. What you said about finding your replacement, like that's such a beautiful statement of it, right? Because when you work with a teen population, every year, we work with high schoolers, every year you're gonna lose a quarter of your kids, right? It's gonna turn over very quickly. But we're also playing a very long game. Right, and that's what I would say to you also. Like we're investing in things that we're not going to see the full results for a very long time. But if you would like to, I'd be remiss not to make a plug for student to student. If you would like to talk more about it and bring it to your community, we are now a part of JFNA. Right, JFNA's big new community relations push. Looked around and saw how do we combat anti-Semitism in these younger ages, right? Everyone was very focused on college campus, for rightly so. A few years ago, we had a lot of people telling us, oh, college campus is such a tough place to be, you should be on college campus. Well, turns out those kids come from somewhere. Right, so, and JFNA is gonna help us bring this to more communities, make more of an impact in more places. But the teen-to-teen relationship, like that is our secret sauce. It's not so secret.
I'd actually also like to add on a question to Dan for this question. What got you to where you are? Like, what was the push that got you into this role and to learn about the Jewish community and get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say I couldn't agree more. It's being inspired by these older teens, I think, is what makes the BBYO model work so well. I had 2 older cousins who were involved in BBYO. One was regional president when I was a junior, the other regional president when I was a sophomore, and I looked up to them so much. I spent childhood walking to their house. They live about 15 minutes away, going to Shabbat dinners, going to family events and family gatherings. And when they asked me to come to something that they were a part of and something I had seen them get so much out of, I was really, really excited and really inspired to be able to step up and become leaders like I had seen them. And also, it's not just being inspired by kids older, but being inspired by kids younger. And I remember around the time of October 7th, I went on AMHSI high school in Israel when I was a sophomore. And again, I replaced myself and sent many more teens there, including my brother. And it was actually one of my brother's friends. They went, and when they were on the program, they had returned, and they were there over October 7th. And everyone made it home safely, Baruch Hashem. But it was really just seeing all of the work that they had been doing in Israel and the actual volunteering and all of the really, really powerful messaging and writing they had been putting out as kids a lot younger than me was really inspiring. And that was something that really made me want to step up. So yes, just on getting involved in the organizations, that first step a little bit deeper into the Jewish world is really important for the inspiration. But also once you're already in, looking to your peers around you and looking at who else is involved and seeing what they're doing can also be really inspiring for you to go out and get that knowledge. Like, teens like to feel knowledgeable. They like to feel like they know what's going on. And when they see their peers who are so deeply ingrained in all of the Jewish history and a knowledge about Israel, it makes them want to get a little bit more educated too.
Kate, you have a lot there. Yeah.
So hard to pick.
And then we'll do it down. Hi, I'm Isabel. I actually work in the teen world at the Baltimore JCC, and everything you guys are saying is very spot on for what I'm seeing, and I really appreciate you bringing that data here to us. So a lot of people this weekend have been talking about the systemic problem of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, and you guys even touched on that in the schools. I know maybe this isn't your area, but do you know, is there things being done to kind of address this? Because a lot of the information is coming from professors, from faculty and administration and teachers, and they are the ones teaching these people, so our teens. So what might be being done on that level that you know of?
I can talk a little bit about some of the places we've been dipping our toe into as we're seeing the same kinds of things. I'd say there are a couple realms to be working in and focusing on for all of us. One is state education boards. Education boards, the lawmaking bodies that put curricula together and that pass the standards that govern what school districts teach. Right? Those have been a target of anti-Semitic activists for a while, right? So if we're not there talking to these legislators, talking to the people on these school boards, letting them know what's going on, because they may not understand it. Right? I had an Iowa director of the Iowa Department of Education tell me that their legislature passed a Holocaust education resolution, right, as many states are trying to, with very little teeth, very little guidance. She's like, I've got teachers Googling how to teach the Holocaust. Oh my God. Yeah, that was my reaction too. Right? What do I give them? Right? So giving the right resources, quality resources, vetted resources to people who if maybe trying their best, maybe not, and trying to hold to account these folks who have the power to set standards for education for entire states, making sure they have the right tools. Another realm is relationships with school officials, right? Superintendents, local school boards, things like that. We've got to have the relationships. We've got to have people who will take our call and listen to us. They may not know the history of anti-Semitism. They may not be able to recognize some of the things that are happening in their own schools that are anti-Semitic. We have got to do the education around these tropes, these histories, these worrisome curriculum that other organizations are pushing that are problematic. So there's a lot of fronts to be combating, unfortunately, and we need more resources on all those. But the relationships are key.
I think we're into one more question.
Hi, thank you for this program. I actually walked into it mistakenly thinking I was in a different program, and I'm so glad I was here.
It's the best thing we can hear.
So I raised my daughters in Peoria, Illinois. And my youngest, when she was in kindergarten, and she went to a non-denominational private school, there was a little boy that was harassing her, and she came home in tears one day and said, so-and-so said that he was going to make a pizza with Jewish blood, and he was going to eat it in front of me. I was beside myself. And I, of course, my daughter wanted me to do nothing. And I said, no, we have to do something. So I called the principal, and she was like, oh, it's just, bad banter amongst kids. I'm sure that, we will ask him to apologize. And I said to her, do you know how many Jews there are in the world? I mean, there are only 15 million of us. And there has got to be, I feel in raising my kids in a smaller community, and I grew up in Minneapolis, and I went to Brandeis, for gosh sake. So, raising kids in Peoria was very difficult. And these smaller communities are so ill-equipped to deal with these issues. I mean, this principal, poor thing, she didn't know what to do, and she had no idea what she was. I mean, I was ready to go in there and just, anyway. But to the extent that on beyond the issue of anti-Semitism, but the overarching issue of hate, why can't we lobby for some sort of federal mandate to teach our children about, what does hate mean, be it anti-Semitic or something else? And why aren't we teaching as early as kindergarten the importance of, humanity and seeing each other and trying to understand each other? And I realize the climate we're in, and I understand who is coming, to Washington. But it seems to me that this is a subject that is so sorely missing in our classrooms. So that's my question. I guess there's a question in there.
So I think that, unfortunately, the answer is there's a lot being discussed about hate, even early on. The problem is Jew hatred is not included in most of that. And the challenge is to get everybody to understand that Jew hatred needs to be included in that, because that's the issue. The kids are learning about hate. And I'll tell you a quick anecdote on this, which just really sums it up. I know of a development director at a college, but it can apply to any high school or elementary school. And he got some complaints about anti-Semitism at the school, and he called his colleague, the head of DEI, to discuss it, and she said, I'm too busy dealing with DEI to deal with the anti-Semitism. So that's a big issue. The kids are learning about hate, but ask most kids. I mean, there was one of the scenarios we do is actually this happened in a Massachusetts high school. They were in a DEI assembly learning about hate in high school, and all the Jewish kids had swastikas airdropped onto their phones in the DEI assembly. Now, the kids went to the school and they talked to the principal, and the school had another assembly dealing with anti-Semitism. Good for them, good for the kids who were empowered to do that. But that's the problem. The problem is the kids are learning about hate, but they're not including Jew hatred as part of that.
I wish we had more time, but we are at the end of our session, and I want to thank you all for having a lot of really great questions, and thank our amazing panelists for bringing your wisdom. I just wanted to lift up a few things that I heard from our panel and from you all during this time of things I heard around bringing people in, speaking each other's languages, showing up for each other, listening to each other, building connections and relationships and community, giving our teens education and brave spaces and a strong identity. And this really just highlights that this issue is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's really holistic supports. And what we heard here at the beginning from Kate around the mental health and wellness piece, but also from all our panelists around how that's integrated into concrete tools. And as someone said, we're happy that we gave you a talkless, concrete solutions-based session. So thank you all for all the work that you're doing. And for those who are interested in learning more about the Be Well research, I really encourage you all to join the November 20th webinar. And thank you all for being such active listeners and participants in the session. Thank you.